So think about someone in your life, like maybe a coworker or just a friend you've known for years who talks a truly massive game.
Oh, yeah. We all definitely know the type.
Right. Like they are constantly making these grand declarations. They're going to completely revolutionize the workflow at the office. Or, I don't know, they're going to organize that massive group trip to Europe.
Or they promise they're going to help you move no matter what.
Exactly. And at first, you listen. You take them at their word because, well, I mean, they're speaking with absolute conviction.
Right, they sound like they mean it.
But then, the deadline passes,
Yeah.
and the workflow is exactly the same. The summer goes by. The Europe trip never happens.
Moving day arrives and they just ghost you entirely.
Yeah, they completely ghost you. So what happens the next time they make one of those grand declarations?
You nod, you smile.
You nod and smile, but internally, your brain has completely stopped processing their words as, like, actionable information. The volume of their voice is exactly the same.
But the words are entirely empty. It's basically a...
Right, the psychology of international relations.
Exactly. We aren't talking about counting tanks or measuring GDP here. It's about this invisible architecture of trust, expectation, and fear that really dictates how nations behave toward one another on a daily basis.
And I think we need to say right up front, because this source material dives directly into international relations and American foreign policy, it inherently touches on some pretty charged territory.
Oh, definitely. It's a sensitive topic.
But our goal here isn't to debate the politics or take a partisan side, left or right.
No, not at all.
We're just opening up the hood to see how the engine of global credibility actually functions, at least according to the framework the author presents.
Right. We are just mapping the territory they drew, looking at the internal logic of the text itself.
Exactly, regardless of who's in the driver's seat in Washington.
And that mechanical view is crucial here. The text offers a very specific lens through which to view geopolitical history and the modern crisis.
Yeah, and understanding how that lens focuses light and what shadows it casts is just a valuable exercise for anyone trying to decipher the current state of the world.
So where do we start?
Let's start with the historical baseline the text establishes, because the author argues that in the past, when an American president spoke, the global audience didn't just hear the words, they listened. And they capture this with this great retro reference, the E.F. Hutton effect.
I love that they use that. It's so vivid.
It is. If you remember those old commercials from the 70s and 80s, the tagline was, when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen.
And the commercials always featured this chaotic, really noisy environment.
Right, like a crowded restaurant or a bustling airport. Two people would be talking, and one would lower their voice and say, well, my broker at E.F. Hutton says.
And instantaneously, the entire room would fall dead silent.
Waiters would literally stop pouring water. People would lean in, straining to catch the financial advice.
Yeah.
And the author uses this exact image to describe the United States on the global stage. They write that when the U.S. cleared its throat, the room went silent because its words were, quote, backed by unwavering intent.
Unwavering intent, yeah. The author is drawing a really sharp line there between volume and resonance.
How so?
Well, in those commercials, the silence of the room wasn't born out of politeness, right? And it certainly wasn't because the speaker had a booming megaphone.
Right. They're usually whispering.
Exactly. The silence was a calculated, self-interested response by everyone else in the room. They stopped talking because they believed the information being conveyed was tied to real-world outcomes.
They believed it had tangible value.
Precisely.
Okay, I understand the analogy, but let me just push back on that a little bit.
Sure.
When we were talking about American foreign policy in the mid to late 20th century, was that silence really about respect for unwavering intent?
You're wondering if it was just fear.
Yeah, plain old coercion. I mean, it seems like the room fell silent because America had the largest nuclear arsenal, the biggest economy, and a pretty strong habit of intervening in countries that didn't listen.
That's a fair point.
Isn't the author kind of romanticizing fear by calling it intent?
It's definitely the intuitive jump to make, but I think it misses the specific distinction the text is trying to establish between brute kinetic force and systemic authority.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Well, the text actually addresses this by bringing up that classic American creed, the buck stops here.
Truman's old desk sign.
Right. The author writes that the world understood American leadership meant being accountable, not just audible.
Accountable, not just audible. Okay.
If it were purely about fear, the silence would be erratic. Nations would only quiet down when a weapon was actively pointed right at them, but the text suggests that the E.F. Hutton effect was really about predictability.
Predictability in what sense, though? Like predicting that we would drop a bomb?
No, predictability in the mechanics of cause and effect on a global scale. The buck stops here implies a ledger. It frames historical American power as this profound burden of responsibility.
Oh, I see.
The author is suggesting that the rest of the world understood that when America stated a position, say guaranteeing the security of a sea lane or drawing a red line regarding a specific territory, it was accepting the responsibility for enforcing that position, even at a cost to itself.
Okay. Accountable versus just audible. That is a crucial distinction.
It really is the core of the whole first section.
It's like the difference between a car alarm that goes off every single time the wind blows or a heavy truck drives by versus a car alarm that, unequivocally only sounds when a window has actually been shattered.
That's a great analogy.
Right, because with the overly sensitive alarm, the volume is super loud, but the information is totally useless. You tune it out, it just becomes background noise.
But with the calibrated alarm...
Exactly. With a calibrated alarm, the moment you hear it, your heart rate spikes.
Yeah.
You look out the window, you change your behavior immediately.
Because you trust the intent of the signal.
Yes. So the text is arguing that America's historical intent was the calibrated alarm. That unwavering commitment to follow through was the actual tangible currency of its foreign policy.
Precisely. And the word currency is really the perfect way to look at it.
How so?
Think of military might as the gold sitting in a vault, but intent? That's the fiat currency that actually circulates and gets business done day to day.
Right.
You can have the most heavily fortified vault on the entire planet, but if the merchants in the marketplace do not believe the paper money you are handing them is actually backed by the gold in that vault.
Your money is completely worthless.
Exactly. The author is positing that the silence in the global room was proof that the currency of American intent was universally accepted.
Because everyone in the room was recalibrating their own positions based on what they expected the U.S. to do.
Exactly. If America says X, America will do Y, that predictability allows other nations to, build their own foreign policies, structure their own economies, sign their own security arrangements.
They are building their houses on the foundation of that predictable intent.
Yes.
Okay, but if intent is the currency, inflation has to hit eventually, right?
Oh, for sure.
Because reading this opening section, it sounds incredibly idealized. It paints this picture of a flawless superpower always executing perfectly on its promises.
Which we know isn't true.
Right. If you know anything about the latter half of the 20th century, you know that is demonstrably false. So how does the piece justify the sheer scale of the historical blunders we've made without just totally destroying its own premise?
Well, it actually confronts those blunders head on. The author explicitly states, quote, that credibility was never perfect.
Okay, so they acknowledge it.
They don't pretend that this historical era of the E.F. Hutton effect was some utopia of flawless execution. And they don't just vaguely gesture at mistakes either.
What do they point to?
They drop 3 massive, historically heavy anchors: Vietnam, Iraq, and Abu Ghraib.
Wow. Okay, those aren't just minor miscommunications. Those are seismic events.
Exactly.
Let's really look at the gravity of what the text is invoking here. I mean, Vietnam wasn't just a stumble. It was a decades-long quagmire that fundamentally tore the fabric of American society apart.
It resulted in staggering casualties.
And a total reevaluation of military intervention. And then you have Iraq, a preemptive war launched on intelligence that proved to be catastrophic and completely destabilized the Middle East.
Right.
And Abu Ghraib, that was a moral failure of the highest order. We're talking about photographic evidence of systemic prisoner abuse that directly contradicted every single value the United States claimed to be enforcing globally.
They are devastating blows.
These are not minor static on the radio dial.
No, they are devastating blows to the very concept of American moral and strategic authority.
So how does the text reconcile that?
The author uses this specific metaphor. They say, the signal was sometimes distorted, but the station was still broadcasting.
Okay, the station was still broadcasting. But my question to the text is, if a signal gets distorted that severely, with events of that sheer magnitude, why didn't the global audience just turn the dial?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right. Why didn't the world just abandon the frequency entirely and look for a new broadcaster?
The answer the text provides lies in a very specific phrase: baseline expectation.
Baseline expectation.
Yes. The author argues that even through the horrific failures of Vietnam, Iraq, and Abu Ghraib, There remained a baseline expectation that America would reckon with what it had done and return to the table with something to offer.
Hmm.
The text is drawing a vital, almost surgical line here between flawed execution and absent intent.
I need you to unpack the mechanics of that reckoning for me.
Yeah.
What does that actually look like on the global stage? Because if I'm a European ally watching Abu Ghraib unfold or watching the failure to find WMDs in Iraq, I'm not just mildly annoyed.
No, you're terrified.
Exactly. I'm terrified that the architect of global security is fundamentally broken. How does a reckoning fix that?
Let's look at the mechanics of those three specific examples through the lens the author provides. When the global audience watched Vietnam, they saw a massive strategic and moral failure.
Undeniably.
But they also watched the American system tear itself open to address it. They watched the Fulbright hearings, they watched the War Powers Resolution being debated.
There was intense, highly visible domestic upheaval.
Exactly. Upheaval that forced a change in the nation's trajectory.
So it wasn't a closed-door Politburo quietly executing a failed general and pretending nothing happened.
Right. It was a messy, loud, democratic hemorrhage.
Wow, okay. That visibility is crucial.
It is. And with Iraq, the world saw the catastrophic intelligence failures, but they also saw the subsequent bipartisan commissions. They saw the electoral bloodbaths where the public punished the architects of the war.
And the really grueling, highly public recalibration of counterinsurgency strategy.
Yes. And with Abu Ghraib, the shock of the photographs was followed by immediate UCMJ investigations, highly publicized court-martials.
And a massive internal and external debate about the laws of war.
Exactly.
I see. So the text is arguing that the distinguishing feature of American credibility wasn't infallibility.
No, not at all.
It was the fact that the structure of the system inherently forced a public reckoning.
Yes. The global audience saw the immense distortion in the signal. But they also heard the agonizing, loud process of the station trying to repair its own transmitter.
That's a great way to put it.
The author implies that this process of accountability, the willingness to investigate, to prosecute, to shift political power based on failures.
That served as the proof of life for the intent.
Exactly.
That reframes the return to the table concept completely.
Hasn't it?
Yeah, because if a nation commits a massive blunder and then simply ignores it or denies it, they have left the table.
Right.
But if they undergo this painful public reckoning, they're proving they still want to sit at the table.
And that they still fundamentally believe in the rules of the table, even if they just flagrantly violated them.
Yeah.
The author's argument is that the world tolerated the distorted signal because they believed the entity running the broadcasting station still valued the broadcast itself.
The intent to be a stabilizing force was still there, even when the execution was an utter disaster.
That is the baseline expectation of accountability that kept the credibility from totally shattering.
It's the difference between listening to a radio station where the song is cutting in and out with terrible interference and turning on the radio to hear dead air.
Exactly.
With the static, you can be furious about the audio quality. You can be frustrated that you can't hear the song, but you know a human being is sitting at the control board trying to send a message. You recognize the existence of the broadcaster.
And as long as you recognize the broadcaster, you don't turn the dial. You wait for the static to clear.
Wow.
That willingness to reckon is what the author views as the ultimate safeguard of historical American credibility.
Okay, so we have this deeply textured historical foundation now, a loud voice backed by the real currency of intent.
Punctuated by catastrophic, distorted stumbles.
Right, but ultimately held together by a systemic, baseline expectation of accountability.
Yep, that's the setup.
And the text uses this entire historical setup as a massive contrast to what is happening right now, correct?
It does. The piece transitions from the historical distorted signal to a completely different and arguably much more dangerous kind of transmission problem today.
What do they say?
The author writes, quote, "Today the volume is there, but the resolve behind it is harder to locate."
Harder to locate. And they introduce a new metaphor here, too.
They do.
They say, quote, "We're still the biggest stick in town, but a stick only carries weight when the person holding it means what they say. Right now, it's not clear that we do."
That's a really powerful image.
It is. Let's stay with the audio theme for a second, though, because it connects so well to the volume argument.
Okay.
We've gone from the E.F. Hutton effect, where a whisper commands silence, to a situation that reminds me of a massive concert amplifier.
An amplifier.
Yeah, imagine the kind of amplifier that forms a towering wall of sound behind a heavy metal band.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
In this scenario, the amplifier is turned all the way up, It is humming with a terrifying amount of electrical energy.
Right.
But there is absolutely no guitar plugged into it.
It's just a raw, indiscriminate hum.
Exactly. It's a loud, intimidating noise. It vibrates the floorboards. It hurts your ears. But it's not making music.
There's no melody, no structure.
Right. No direction. It's just volume without intent. And the text seems to be arguing that this ambiguity, this deafening hum without a clear message, has accidentally become our new actual policy.
Which is terrifying, and it forces us to really examine the nature of power in the modern era.
How so?
Well, the physical reality of the biggest stick in town has not diminished. The author's very clear about that. The amplifier is still massive.
The size of the military, the economy, all of that.
Exactly. The sheer scale and dominance of the American economy, the technological edge, the kinetic potential is undeniably there.
So the text isn't saying America is weak. It's not a story of imperial decline in terms of, like, material assets.
Not at all. The military budget is larger than ever. The material assets are staggering. But the text argues that the weight of that stick in the theater of international relations is not derived from its physical mass.
What is it derived from?
The weight is entirely psychological.
Psychological.
Yeah. A stick only deters an adversary if that adversary firmly believes you will actually swing it.
Oh, wow. The moment they doubt your willingness to swing, the stick loses its psychological gravity.
It becomes just a piece of wood. It doesn't matter how polished or heavy it is.
Right.
The author is diagnosing the modern crisis not as a lack of power, but as a vacuum of locatable resolve.
Harder to locate.
Yeah.
This specific phrasing really stands out to me.
Why is that?
It implies that the resolve used to be sitting right there on the surface, easily observable. And now you have to go digging for it, and you still might not even find it.
And that creates a profound ambiguity. When the world looks at the United States today, according to this framework, they hear the volume.
Right, the press conferences, the fiery declarations.
The social media posts, the diplomatic threats. But they cannot locate the firm underlying commitment to back those words up with sustained action.
They can't find the E.F. Hutton intent.
Exactly.
And ambiguity, when you are standing next to someone holding a giant stick, is incredibly anxiety-inducing.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, if you're an ally standing in front of that humming amplifier, you are constantly bracing yourself. Because you don't know if a deafening chord is going to be struck at any second, or if the hum is just going to fade out entirely.
It is an exhausting state of suspense.
It really is.
And in geopolitics, exhaustion and suspense are the primary ingredients for instability. Think about the game theory of this.
Yep.
When a superpower's words are divorced from clear, locatable resolve, the rest of the world doesn't just freeze in place and wait.
Right, they have to start making calculated guesses.
Exactly.
So how does that actually play out mechanically? Like, if I'm an ally, what does that guessing game look like?
Well, if you are an ally, you have to guess if the mutual defense treaty you signed 50 years ago still holds water today.
Which is terrifying.
Right. If a hostile neighbor starts massing troops on your border and the U.S. issues a stern warning, you have to guess whether that warning is the E.F. Hutton intent or just the humming amplifier.
And if you guess wrong?
If you guess wrong, your nation might be invaded.
Wow.
So to hedge your bets, you might start militarizing your own borders. You might seek new, perhaps less stable alliances, or pursuing your own nuclear capabilities.
Because you can't rely on the old assumptions.
Exactly. The ambiguity forces allies to act defensively and unpredictably.
And what if I'm an adversary? If I'm a rival nation looking to expand my territory or influence, how do I react to the humming amplifier?
Oh, you test it.
You test it.
Absolutely. If the intent is unlocatable, adversaries are incentivized to engage in salami slicing tactics.
Salami slicing.
Yeah, they take a tiny slice of territory here, they launch a minor cyber attack there, sponsor a proxy militia somewhere else.
Just constantly pushing the boundary.
Right. They keep taking small actions to see if the stick will actually swing. And because the superpower's resolve is ambiguous, the superpower often doesn't swing the stick for minor infractions.
Which just emboldens the adversary to take a larger slice next time.
Exactly. Ambiguity actively invites aggression because it removes the predictability of the deterrent.
So the text is describing a scenario where America is simultaneously the loudest voice in the room and the most unpredictable actor.
Which is a very dangerous combination.
That sounds like a recipe for a massive miscalculation.
It is, and the author elevates the stakes dramatically in the final section of the text based on this exact dynamic. They move beyond just describing a behavioral trend and begin diagnosing a systemic crisis.
Right. The author states that this ambiguity is, quote, not just a policy problem, but a structural threat to the stability of the world.
A structural threat.
Now, when we start throwing around phrases like structural threat and geopolitical ambiguity, it can sound incredibly academic.
It can feel very detached. Yeah.
Right, detached from the reality of, waking up, getting coffee, going to work. But this is where the text argument really hits the pavement for you, the listener.
Yes. The author is arguing that the invisible architecture of the globe is currently under extreme stress.
Let's avoid the cliche of comparing this to a game of Jenga, because this isn't a parlor game.
No, the stakes are much higher.
If we think about the global system as an immense, complex piece of architecture, like a skyscraper of trade agreements, maritime laws, and security umbrellas.
I like that.
The text is suggesting that American intent has been the load-bearing steel core of that building for the last 70 years.
A load-bearing core, yes.
The author writes that the world organized itself around the core assumption that America would show up. But I want to press the text on this, because what does showing up actually mean?
It's a good question.
Because if it just means military intervention, half the globe actively wants us to stop showing up.
Right. To understand what showing up means in this specific framework, we have to synthesize everything the text has built so far. Showing up is the holistic package of predictable American intent.
So it's not just boots on the ground.
No, it's multidimensional. First, it's the E.F. Hutton effect. Showing up means providing clear, reliable signals that allow the rest of the room to organize their economies and foreign policies without constantly guessing.
Okay.
Second, it's the buck stops here. Showing up means accepting the burden of enforcing the rules of the road.
Right, like if a rogue nation decides to close a major international shipping lane.
Exactly. Showing up means the U.S. Navy guarantees that lane stays open, ensuring global trade doesn't collapse.
And it also has to include the accountability piece, right?
Oh, absolutely. Showing up means reckoning with the static. When the U.S. fails, showing up means engaging in that painful process of domestic and international accountability, proving that the system can correct itself.
So showing up is really the assumption that the United States will consistently maintain the scaffolding of the international order.
Yes.
And the text includes a deeply important caveat here. They write that the world organized itself around this assumption, quote, for better or worse.
For better or worse.
That tiny phrase is doing an immense amount of heavy lifting.
It is a critical insertion. The author is being incredibly careful not to claim that the American-led global structure was some sort of pristine utopia.
Because it demonstrably wasn't.
Exactly. For better or worse acknowledges that this global organization marginalized certain populations, it benefited Western powers disproportionately, and it was frequently enforced through means that were deeply flawed, violent, and unjust.
As they already pointed out with Vietnam and Iraq.
Right. The author isn't defending the moral purity of the structure. They are simply establishing its reality.
It's like saying, look, you might hate the architectural style of this building.
Sure.
The plumbing might leak in the basement, the rent might be exorbitant, and the landlord has a history of erratic behavior.
That's a great way to put it.
But this is the physical building that all 8 billion of us currently live inside.
That's exactly it. The text is arguing that global markets, international supply chains, webs of alliances, non-proliferation treaties, and just the basic norms of global security.
They were all constructed on top of this psychological assumption.
Yes. They were built on the belief that if push came to shove, the United States had the locatable resolve to maintain the foundational beams of the building.
And this is exactly why it matters to everyday life. It's easy to tune out foreign policy as something that just, happens in boardrooms in Geneva.
Right.
But the text is arguing that the stability of your daily life relies on this psychological assumption. The invisible architecture that ensures the microchips in your car can cross the ocean safely.
The stability that keeps the inflation of your groceries relatively in check.
The deterrents that prevent regional border disputes from spiraling into a third world war. All of it is tied to the weight of the biggest stick in town.
And if the intent behind that stick is fading into ambiguity, the foundations of the building begin to shift. The text warns that the core assumption of America showing up is currently being actively tested.
Which brings us to the incredibly grim warning the author leaves us with.
Yes, it's a stark ending.
They write, quote, "What happens if it breaks is a question none of us should be eager to answer."
It's chilling.
It's a chilling note to end on because it doesn't offer a solution. It just points directly at a cliff edge.
It is ominous because it points to the profound danger of the unknown.
Right.
If that load-bearing core of American resolve is fully removed, the text doesn't pretend to predict exactly how the skyscraper collapses, but it guarantees that the structure will fundamentally shift.
And historically, when structural shifts happen in international relations, they do not happen quietly.
Never. They mean periods of immense volatility, proxy conflicts, economic decoupling, and a fierce, often violent contest to establish new rules and new boundaries.
We are essentially living through the friction of a transition period.
That's exactly what it feels like.
We are moving from an era defined by the heavy currency of a predictable word to an era defined by the deafening, ambiguous echo of an amplifier with nothing plugged into it.
And that ambiguity, the author concludes, is the single most dangerous element in the geopolitical ecosystem today.
Well, let's trace the journey this deep dive has taken us on today, guided entirely by the framework of this brief, dense text.
We've covered a lot of ground.
We really have. We started by examining the author's historical baseline, the E.F. Hutton effect. We looked at a time when American rhetoric carried the heavy currency of unwavering intent, and global leadership meant embracing the ledger of accountability.
The idea that the buck truly stopped here.
Exactly.
And then we explored the crucial nuance the text introduces. The admission that this historical credibility was deeply scarred by massive, devastating distortions like Vietnam, Iraq, and Abu Ghraib.
But yet, the text argued the global station kept broadcasting and the world kept listening.
Because there was a systemic, baseline expectation that America would publicly reckon with its failures and return to the table to maintain the system.
And from that foundation, we moved into the stark, anxious contrast of the present day. The author argues we now possess immense volume but unlocatable resolve.
We hold the biggest stick in town, but that stick is rapidly losing its psychological weight.
Because the intent behind it has been replaced by an exhausting ambiguity. Allies are forced to guess, and adversaries are incentivized to test.
And finally, we unpack the author's ultimate warning that this modern ambiguity has mutated from a mere bad policy choice into a structural threat.
Right. The entire global order, for better or worse, was built on the psychological assumption that America would show up. And as that assumption strains under the weight of ambiguity, the stability of the global architecture is put at massive risk.
It's a heavy conclusion.
It is. And before we wrap up, I just want to reiterate our mission from the top of the show. Today's deep dive was an exercise in mapping the mechanics of credibility, exactly as they are laid out in the provided text of The Credibility Gap.
Right. Maintaining that neutrality.
We've explored the author's stark thesis without taking a partisan stance on the underlying political implications. Our job was to show you how the text connects the historical concept of accountability directly to modern structural threats, dissecting the engine of global trust.
It is a demanding framework because it forces us to evaluate power not just as a collection of physical assets, but as a fragile psychological contract between nations.
It really does. And I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over on your own as you go about your day. It's a thought that builds on this text, but takes one step beyond the author's final ominous warning.
Okay.
The text ends by warning that the assumption of America showing up is being tested. And what happens if that assumption breaks is a question no one should want to answer. But consider this. Geopolitics, much like nature, fundamentally abhors a vacuum. If the global room was entirely organized around the expectation of America's resolve, and that resolve finally fades into total silence.
Someone has to fill it.
Exactly. What new organizing principle or whose unyielding resolve will inevitably rush in to fill the terrifying silence in that room?